And I don't know what collapsed, but a number of people got killed last night in Meron. I don't want to share bad news. So just the point that I want to say, that's what the rabbi was. I don't know if it was hard to hear the rabbi what he was alluding to. That's what happened. And the thing is, we will dedicate the learning today to memory of those people that died last night. Wow. Wow. So you said it wasn't. Morning.
Morning, Rabbi.
Morning. Morning. We'll take it. We'll take out. We are on Lamed Zayin Amud Beis, 37b. We are in challenging Gemara here in Berachos. This is not so simple Gemara that we're doing, trying to get to understand Berachos. Well, all the different cases. And the fact that maybe we're not the ladies in the kitchen makes it a little more difficult for us. We're in the middle of the page, not in the middle of the page, about 10 lines from the top. Amar Rava. You have it? Amar Rava. The first order line is Mavarach Alav Klum. Okay? Let's make sure that everybody has it. Okay, let's just your first name again? Mike. Mike, you got it? Okay, 37b, about 10 lines from the top. Amar Rava. Rava says the following. Hai re'ita dechakloi. This is food. This is a food that you cooked. You had flour in this food. You had oil in the food. You had honey in the food. It's a mixture, right? And now the Gemara is made by the villagers. People in the village, they would make this type of food with the mafshi bekimcha. They put in a lot of flour. Moni Yosef Tzaddik. They put a lot of flour into this food, into this mixture. Mevarech bar minim bezono. The bracha that you recite on such a food is bar minim bezono. However, and the Gemara says, "My timer." What's the reason? The samida ikka, the flour that's in this mixture of flour, oil, and honey. The flour is the main ingredient. However, the mechuzah, but when they make this mixture in the city doesn't put in so much flour. The city is more diet sensitive. They don't want so much flour into their I'm making a little joke, but they're a little diet sensitive. They have less flour in this mixture, and the lo mafshiba kimcha, they don't make it with so much flour. And the Gemara says, and Mechuzah, by the way, is a city in Bavel, and it's where Rava lived. So in Mechuzah, where they don't put so much flour, so he felt mevarach alav shakol niya bevaro. So Rava says that the proper bracha for this mixture that contains flour, honey, and oil.
Rabbi.
Good morning, Mike. Mike, we're in Lamed Zayin Amud Beis, 37b, around 10 lines from the top. So Rava said, and by the way, rabbis sometimes change their mind. Sometimes they have one opinion, and then later on they change their mind. Years later, they might change their mind, and they see it differently. So originally, Rava made a distinction between this food that was made in the city with very much less flour, and he said that the main ingredients is the honey, the oil. And what's the bracha on honey? The bracha on honey is what? Shehakol. So therefore, he said that you should make a shehakol on this on this food that was made with flour, honey, and oil. However, my timer, because he felt dufsha ikka, he felt that the flour, is it clear, Mr. Haver? He felt that the flour was the main food here, and therefore, since it was the main food, either because the majority was flour, was honey, and the flour was just to give it a little taste, but it wasn't really. But the main thing was the honey. So he originally came out and said that you make a shehakol on such a food, even though it contained from the five species, 5 grains. And then he changed his mind. Hadama Rava. And then Rava said, Idi v'idi, it doesn't make a difference the way they make this in the village or whether they make this in the city, whether it has a lot of flour or whether it has a little bit of flour. Idi v'idi borim mizonos. Why? Because he heard of Rav and Shmuel. The Rav and Shmuel, the Omri Tavayu. Rav and Shmuel says, both of them say, Kol sheyesh bo mechameshes haminim, any food that you cook that has from the ingredients, from the 5 grains, and it's there for taste purposes, not that it's there to hold it together, for taste purposes, mevarchin alav bari minei mizonot. The bracha that you say is bari minei mizonot. So therefore, he said, therefore you have to go ahead and say the bracha of bari minei mizonot. Now, sometimes there are certain foods that you have two ikrim. Sometimes, Rav Moshe Feinstein, interesting, he said if you have an ice cream sandwich, you have the wafer on the outside and the wafer. So he would say you can make 2 brachot, make separately, because he said they're both ikrim. You say that the wafer is mezonot, and you'll separate the wafer, and the ice cream is an ikr. So that's what the Gemara says. You'll make a bari minei mezonot on this flour, oil, and honey dish.
But Rabbi, on smach ma, they decided that. They just decided because they sounds for them more appealing. What on smach ma?
I would think the smach ma is that the grains are very significant. The 5 grains are very significant. So therefore, if the 5 grains any of the 5 grains are put into, because a grain is something that gives you a lot of sustenance. As you know, grain, we make a bracha achrona on grain, even if it's a form of a cake, ala mechya. The grain has the ability to say birkat hamazon if you bake it. So therefore, the grains are very powerful. They're very powerful type of food, in contrast to other foods that are not from the 5 grains. So therefore, it sustains you, it fulfills you up, the grains. And I presume because of that's the smach ma that Yosef is asking what's unique about the grains. That is unique about the grain. It has.
But you can say that about everything else. You can say about the water. Water gives you life. Without water, you can't live in this world.
Yeah, but water doesn't do. Water gives you life. It keeps you hydrated. It's not. Water doesn't really give you the pep. It's not giving you the pep. It keeps you going.
Okay, but without water one day,
you get the pep from the real food. What do you say?
Without water one day. Without a water for one day, you can die, and also we already said also, if you take the olive oil and you mix it with something else, you can say bore pri ha'etz. So why don't bore pri ha'etz?
Again, when we talked about the olive oil mixing it, we're talking about not if you're having mezonot in the mixture, right? You're having mezonot. The olive oil we were talking about when you were mixing it with other types of liquid. But here we're talking about when you have the mezonot as one of the 5 grains, as part of the ingredients. Therefore, the bracha will be bari minei mezonot. Rabbi Yosef. We're going to continue here. We have Rabbi Yosef in the Gemara. Have a great day. Amar Rav Yosef, Hai chavitza the ispe perurin. So the chavitza is that you have these pieces, you have this food that contains in this food pieces of bread. We had this earlier in the Gemara on Lamed Vav Amud Beis, the chavitza, right? We had the chavitza earlier. We had chavitz kedera. And the chavitz kedera is if you have pieces of bread and honey, and you go ahead and you cook. You make a food, you make this cooked food using pieces of bread and other ingredients, and you make, so here we're talking about, we're using bread, pieces of bread to make to make this type of food. So now the question is, now does it once was bread, but now it was baked, and now it's from being baked, now you went in and you cooked it. Like people, if you look at matzah meal, right? So matzah meal is pieces of matzah, and then sometimes you make matzah bra, you fry it, you do other things. You make other foods with pieces, with using already matzah or using some other bread. Or let's say there's something called challah kugel, that they take pieces of challah and they go ahead and they make a kugel. They make some sort of, so now we're talking about, again, we're having pieces of bread mixed with other ingredients. And the question is, what is the bracha on this food? So the Gemara
the rabbi, is that considered the main ingredient?
Right. Does it still retain its original status of bread? So the Gemara says, how big are the pieces? The Gemara says, the Gemara says, it depends if the size is a kazayas, if the piece is a kazayas, is the size of an olive, or is the pieces very, very small, less than an olive size of the pieces. So if the high chavitza, the isbei.
Where are we, Rabbi? Which line are we on, please?
We are on about almost halfway down, about a third down. Amar Rav Yosef. The first word line is Yosef. You have it?
Yes, Rabbi. Thank you.
Amar Rav Yosef. High chavitza, the isbei pirurim. So you have pieces. It's made with pieces of bread, and you made this food. So if it's the isbei pirurim kazayis, if it has a kazayis of bread, and within this piece of food that you made, so if it's b'tchila, then you would say a bracha, a barach alav hamotzi lechem and aretz. If it still has it's a piece of, if it's still a kazayis, it didn't dissolve, it didn't get small, it didn't fall apart, and it's the size of a kazayit, of an olive size. Mevarach alav hamotzi lechem and aretz. It's still considered bread, and you'll say hamotzi lechem min haaretz. However, what do you say?
It needs to be kazait, and it needs to be still with the texture of bread.
Right. We're going to see more about that it looks like bread or doesn't look like bread. Here, the Gemara didn't go into that yet. So that's more we have to see as we go along. The Gemara is only thing the Gemara is now saying is that it's the size. Yeah, it's a piece. The piece is the size of a kazayit. The size of a kazayit. So mevarach alav hamotzi lechem min haaretz, ula b'sof mevarach alav shalosh brachot. And also you would say birkat hamazon as a result of that. Meaning it's still considered bread. It has a significant size left to it. However, the less purun kazayit, if as a result of the cooking, it fell apart, and now the pieces, it became pieces. The cooking softened everything, and now you have pieces, small pieces, and they're not the size of a kazayit. Each piece here in this pot is less than a kazayit, less than an olive size. They're small pieces. This cooking came into alpha. Now, if it went into small pieces, it loses the status of bread. Once you cook this bread had other ingredients, and you cooked it and it fell into small pieces. So then he says, you make a borei minei mezonos, u'besof bracha achat mein shalosh. And then what you would do afterwards, you would say an ala michya afterwards. So again, this food, the bread had pieces of bread and you cooked it, you mixed it with other ingredients, and then it fell apart. But the question is, how much is it still a size of an olive? Still a size of kazayas that retains the bracha motzalachem and aretz? Am I clear, Maya? That's what it sounds like. It's if each in a size piece, right? The fact that the whole thing might have 10 sizes, 10 pieces of bread, 10 kasesim of bread, but if at the end of the day, each piece, if it fell apart, that's less than a kazayid, it's not, it loses, each piece lost its status of bread, and now it's, and then eventually maybe we could talk about, we get into the croutons, right? How they, every crouton is very small, and morning, and croutons was originally baked.
Morning,
fried.
Morning, everyone.
Morning, Mr. Haber asked about the croutons early in the week. We're going to see more about the croutons because here we see something morning that the crouton might have some similarity to this. It was first baked and then they fried it. And Tosfos also says like frying is like cooking in a certain sense. Some understand. So you moved it into a different level, and it's small little pieces. So we're going to see that there are those that obviously will say you make a borei minei mezonot on those croutons, on those commercial croutons. It's not. I saw, there's difference. It's the difference between taking regular bread and cutting bread into little pieces. Then it's still a motzi. If you take a piece of bread, I cut the bread into little pieces, little pieces, like they do when people in certain restaurants. When you want, what do? They cut the bread by the washing station. It's a small piece, but it's still bread. It's just a small piece. Nothing changed in it. But if you moved it to the next level, you cooked the bread with water or you fried it, then we can get into possible maybe whether and it's small pieces, and it's made to be small pieces, like the croutons are made for that. So we'll see more as we go that it might, therefore maybe that's why people will make a mezonot on the crouton. I just want to address a little bit Mr. Haber's question that he asked on Monday or Tuesday about the croutons. But there's a nice sefer called on Berachos by Rabbi Badner that maybe I'm going to bring in, that he discusses this issue on the croutons, and I want to bring it in hopefully next week. I'll bring it in. I'll read to you what he says about the croutons. Okay. So the Gemara says, so meanwhile, we're saying about croutons, we're saying so far we're making a difference between taking just bread and cutting it into little small pieces. It's still bread. Even as small as you cut it, you cut it, this piece of the bread. It's a piece of bread. I don't care how small you cut it. You see it's a piece of bread, say I'm motzi. But if it went to a different level, you fried it afterwards, and it was fried with the intent, in the way of for small pieces, like the way they make it commercially for small pieces. There the mezono.
Rabbi,
yes.
It sounds that the size of the bread, the piece, that's what makes the difference.
That's what the Gemara so far is saying. We're going to see as we go along. This is the opinion that the Gemara is saying here. It's made that it's saying that the food fell apart in the cooking, and each piece is less than a kazayit. Now it lost its status of bread. That's what this opinion is saying. And
the kazayit size, Rabbi, there is different olive sizes.
That's true. So right. So the kazayit size is something that that sort of Avadia says it's like around 1 ounce, 27 grams. That's the kazayit that we work with. Okay. Correct. There are different types of olives, and obviously it's a certain type of olive that will be the right kazayit. The Gemara says, so now, Amar Rabbi Yosef. So Rabbi Yosef said, Rabbi Yosef said a law. He said this law, he makes a distinction whether it's a size that he says that if it's the size of a kazayit, even though it was baked once before, or once you cooked it, the size of a kazayit, it's still hamotzi. That's what he said. Where does he know it from? You made a statement. That's the law. What's your source? What's your reason? Where did you get it from? As Yosef Atzadik says, Asmach ma. Amar Rav Yosef, where did I know this law from? May, you got it? Maya, you got it? He says, Midatanya, I know it from the following Braita. Hayomeid umakriv. Now Rashi learns it's referring to a Yisrael, a Yisrael non-Kohen, that's going to bring a korban mincha. he's bringing a mincha. A mincha is made out of flour, and there's different type of menachot. You know, some minchas are fried. That you fry the flour. You fry it. You know, you make it from fried. Some minchas are baked. There's all different types of menachot. So what happens? So he says, "Haya omeid umakriv menachot b'Yerushalayim." The Yisrael was standing and giving to the Kohen the mincha in Yerushalayim. He was giving the Kohen the mincha. So the Yisrael Omer Baruch Shechianu V'Giyanu Lazman Hazeh. He says a Shechianu. Now, why are you saying a Shechianu when he's giving the Kohen the mincha? So Rashi says, if he didn't bring a mincha, if it was a long period of time that he didn't bring a mincha, then the Yisrael will say Shechianu. That's what Rashi says over here. Meaning you didn't do this mitzvah in a long time. Like when you take a lulav and etrog. What do you say when you take a lulav and etrog? Shechianu. So if you didn't bring, if this Yisrael did not bring a mincha in a long time, he'll say that he hasn't done it in such a long time. He's doing this mitzvah, so what will he do? He'll say Shechianu v'kimanu v'giyanu. Tosfos takes issue, and because Tosfos says, because Hayomedu makriv v'nachot, he was standing and offering a mincha, not bringing the mincha, giving the flour to the Kohen. It says he was offering it. Sounds like it's the Kohen that's bringing it up on the mizbeach. The Kohen, what does the Kohen do? He takes like a hand, a fistful, I don't know, 3 fingers, 3 middle fingers, takes the flour, he puts on the mizbeach, on the altar. So it sounds like it's going on the Kohen. So Tosfos says that because, as you know, the Kohanim, we learned about in Tanit, they worked 2 weeks a year. There was 24 groups of Kohanim, and they were split. The 24 families of Kohanim were split, and each family worked 1 week at a time. So therefore, the last time you worked was 25 weeks ago. So therefore, you haven't been on job for 24 weeks. So therefore, the Kohen who comes back to his job, he goes ahead and he'll say the Shechianu when he's bringing the mincha. It could be why Rashi might not go with that understanding of Tosfot is because why should it be specifically on the mincha that he should say Shechianu? If the point is he came back to service, the Kohen came back to do service, so it's not just the mincha, he should say Shechianu, and everything he does is to say Shechianu. Why a mincha over anything else? Why a mincha over lighting the menorah? Or why a mincha over any other service or any other korban that he's bringing? So the fact that it emphasizes that he's saying a Shechianu, so maybe Rashi says it's referring to the Yisrael who hasn't borne the korban in a long time. And Rashi in Menachot says, we're talking about a Kohen that never did this mitzvah before. It's like a bar mitzvah type of guy. He never did this mitzvah before. You know, by the way, we don't make a Shechianu when you put on tefillin. There's discussion about it. But why not? But it's like the guy who never did this mitzvah before in his life, the Kohen, the first time he performs the mitzvah of bringing the mincha, he goes ahead and he, that's why he's saying a Shechianu. And that pshat is also, you can ask on that pshat, the Gemara does not indicate that it's the first time that he did it. So why should you say that it's talking about the first time that he did it? So he says the Shechianu. By the way, today someone came to shul today with a new talit. I told him you're supposed to say a Shechianu on the talit because of the talit, because it's a new garment. You're supposed to say Shechianu. You should look at a wedding, the Sfardim, right? You put on a talit at the wedding. What does the Chatan say? If it's a night wedding, you don't make a bracha on the tzitzit at night. But what will he do at night? If it's a night wedding, he says a Shechianu. Right? If a guy got married last night and he put on the talit, he doesn't say la sateh but tzitzit. He doesn't say the bracha on the talit because it's nighttime. But what will he say? Shechianu. Right? That's what he's supposed to do. Okay. So the Gemara says, then the Gemara continues. Now, So he omeid umakriv menachot Yerushalayim. Omer baruch shechiyanu v'kimanu v'giyanu lazman hazeh. Not lon la'ochlon. The Kohen took, if the Kohen went ahead and he took it to eat, right? He was taking the, now, so not the la'ochlon. He went ahead, the Kohen took the mincha to eat, because after they put this, this handful, this 3 fingers of flour, or from the mincha on the mizbeach, or he did, that's the part that goes on. The rest is eaten by the kohanim. The kohanim eat the rest of the mincha. There are certain minchot that are not eaten by the kohanim. A mincha that the kohen brings is not eaten by the kohanim. But if I, the Yisrael, bring a mincha to the Beit HaMikdash, it's one of the things that the kohen eats. Just a little certain amount goes on the mizbeach of the flour, and then the rest is eaten by the what? The kohanim. Yes, Mike.
What's the korban mincha? Is it just flour and that's it? So what do they eat?
Right, the flour. So then you make it, you bake it. So, like, I'm going to read to you what it says. Menachot are flour offerings. Some are brought as actual flour, and then eventually you make it into matzah, because the menachot are all matzah. By the way, a mincha is not chametz. It doesn't become, it's, the Torah says it should not become chametz. So some of the guy brings flour to the kohen, and sometimes they only bring it after the flour is made into bread. Then they bring it as a bread to the kohen, as a mincha, and sometimes it is made into bread either through frying on a flat pan. They would fry the flour on the flat pan, on a pan with oil, and then, because the mincha is belula bashemen, it's flour that's mixed with what? With oil. But the question is it fried or is it baked? There are different ways. There are different type of menachot. There are different ways you could bring the mincha. Is that clear?
So in our case, that's not how they brought it. They brought it as flowers with the hands, you said, right?
So even in the case, Mike, that it wasn't. There's a case of the raw flour is the classic example. Raw flour like this, but he takes with his fingers. But even if it's not raw flour, if it was baked, so he would take his fingers and he would dig. The Kohen would dig his 3 fingers into that baked matzah, and he would take that part you put on the mizbeach.
What's a mizbeach? It's like something with fire on top of it?
Right, correct. Mizbeach is the altar. It has a fire on top, and that's where they would bring the flour, and that's where the blood, when they would sprinkle the blood on the altar, they would bring certain parts of the animal would go onto the altar.
It's like a barbecue or a chimney type of thing.
Right, exactly. But the point here is that the items that you put on are supposed to be consumed by the fire. In contrast to a barbecue where you want to eat the food that you're putting on it. When you put something on the altar on the mizbeach, the point over there is that the food that you put on it should be consumed by the mizbeach. By the way, we daven arvit. One of the reasons arvit, the evening service, corresponds to the limbs the fats that went on the altar during the day that were not, God bless you, that was not completely consumed by day, and therefore it remained on the mizbeach at night, and therefore it was burning the whole night, and we pray corresponding to that, because that service that was done at night, it was still, because the morning prayer corresponds to the morning offering. The afternoon prayer corresponds to the afternoon offering. What is the night prayer? It's to the limbs and the fats that are being burned continuously throughout the night, if they were not consumed by day. So the Gemara continues. So now, Mike, we're going to get into the offering, the mincha that was fried in the pan, that type of offering. We're going to see in a minute. So the Gemara says, we have V'tani Allah, and the Mishnah says in Menachot, the Kulam, all the Menachot that were made, let's say in the pan. Let's say he fried it in the pan. So what does he do? Posts on kazayit. He goes ahead and he cuts the matzah that he fried in the pan, and he goes ahead and he makes it into pieces of a kazayit. The Torah says, "Pasot otsa pitin." He goes ahead and he cuts it into pieces. He cuts it into pieces, and then after he cuts it into pieces, Rashi says, then he takes the 3 fingers and he digs it into the piece, and then he puts that piece, after he dug his 3 fingers into the piece, he puts that on the altar. That's what he needs to do. Now, so, and then this applies to whether you bake, whether you bake this flour and you made it baked, whether you fried it, all of them, you go ahead and you take your 3 fingers, and then you go ahead and you put on the mizbeach. And what did we say? You say a hamotzi lechem min haaretz. You would still say a hamotzi lechem min haaretz, even though it was fried. And the fried is like cooking, Tosfos says. But this fried is like cooking. So we see, and what was the size? The size that they would cut it to was a kazayit. They cut it into pieces. And from the pieces, they would go ahead and take and they would take this 3 fingers from the pieces. So we see it was pieces, and yet it still retained the bracha. As long as this was a kazayit, it has the bracha of what? Hamotzi lechem min haaretz. So that's what the Gemara wants to say. So now, Amalei Abaye says, Elame'ata, according to what you're saying now, that if you have a piece, you're saying that if you have a piece that was cooked, and it's a kazayit to say hamotzi, the Tana de Rabbi Yishmael. There's a Tana de Rabbi Yishmael that argues. He says that you go ahead. What does he say? Parchon asher machzir l'sultan. That he says you got to go ahead and you have to before you do the kmitzah, before you go ahead and you put the 3 fingers in to separate from that. Let's say you bake. What happened? You baked the bread and you made it into matzah, and then you brought it as a korban, or you fried it. What you need to do afterwards, before you go ahead and you take the fistful, whatever you call it, you have to grind it, make it into small pieces of flour. You don't leave it in that status. You got to go ahead and you go ahead and you bring it back to what you crush the bread, the mincha, the offering that you go ahead, the matzah that you brought. You have to go ahead and what? And recrush it before you go ahead and do the kmitzah. Before you go ahead and take the fingers. So according to that, Horchon asher machzirin l'saltan. Are you going to tell me, Hachinami the lo boi beruchei hamotzi lechem min haaretz? Are you going to tell me that since they are less than a kazayit, the pieces, when after you crush them, you crush the pieces, you're going to tell me it's no more. You're telling me that it's less than a kazayit after they cut into small pieces. You're going to tell me you don't say hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Now, if that's the case, v'chitema hachinami, maybe that's true. Maybe this rabbi would hold that you would not say hamotzi lechem min haaretz on the small pieces. Meaning the first rabbi said, because it's a piece as a kazayit, you say hamotzi lechem min haaretz. But we have another rabbi that Rabbi Yishmael, that the pieces are not a kazayit. And are you going to tell me that he holds that you will not say hamotzi lechem min haaretz? Would you say because it's so small? Are you going to tell me that's true? Vatanya, we learned in a Braita. Look at Mikulam. If you went ahead and you have the pieces from the flour, the pieces from the mincha, right? There was all these pieces of the mincha. You went ahead and you gathered these pieces together, and as a result of that, kazayit, the pieces added up to a kazayit. As a result of you gathering the multiple pieces together, they equal the size of an olive. Now, if that's the case, if you gathered them together, that means it was not originally a kazayit. If you have to gather them to make it a kazayit. Now, remember, the other rabbi said that all the pieces, the first rabbi said the pieces are cut into the size of a kazayit. This opinion, this Braita that clearly states that less than a kazayit is arguing on that. So what do we have? We have a machloket. What does it mean do you have to, by the mincha, do you have to cut the pieces into a kazayit? Does it have to retain the size of a kazayit before you do the hand, the fistful? Or could you cut it to very even smaller than a kazayit? So we had one opinion that says it must be the size of a kazayit. When the Torah says you have to cut into pieces, it means the size of the kazayit. But now we see a different opinion. We have a different opinion that says that you don't bring it into the size of a kazayit. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael. And this Braita seems to be going with that opinion, because this Braita says they were less than a kazayit and you're gathering them together. So therefore, this Braita is the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael that says that you don't need to cut it into kazayit. These are small pieces. And yet, what does it say? Laka mikulam v'achlam. And you went ahead and I ate all these pieces. I ate this piece and I ate this piece. I put a few pieces in together and I ate the kazayit. Im chametzu, if it was chametz, anosh karet. What's the halacha for eating a kazayit of chametz on Pesach? The punishment is karet, gets cut off. He loses the next world, right? That's the punishment for eating chametz on Pesach. But how much chametz does a person need to eat on Pesach to violate, to get karet? You have to eat a kazayit. You're not allowed to eat less, but to get karet, you have to eat a certain amount. Just like to get malkut, to get lashes for eating not kosher, you have to eat a kazayit. So too, to get karet, he has to eat how much? A kazayit. So if the pieces added together and he ate a kazayit of this stuff that was chametz, he gets cursed. In matzahu, but if it's in the status of matzah, and he gathered this piece, he took a little piece of matzah and another little piece of matzah and and you gather them together, and they added up to a kazayit, even though they were all little pieces, like you call a little crumb, but a big crumb or big pieces, big crumbs of matzah. If you eat big crumbs of matzah together, you'll get up to a kazayit, and you will fulfill your mitzvah of matzah on Pesach. The matzah, who adam yotzei yidei Pesach, you can fulfill your obligation on Pesach. Now, the fact that you can fulfill your obligation on Pesach with these pieces of the mincha has to be, it's hamotzi, right? We're saying it has to be hamotzi, because if it's not hamotzi, what item could you fulfill your mitzvah of matzah on Pesach, the night of Pesach, with egg matzah? No. Egg matzah, what's the bracha right? Egg matzah. What bracha you make on egg matzah? Mizono. It's not considered matzah. It's not considered bread. So the fact that we say that if the pieces come, these are little pieces, and yet you go ahead and you say you could go ahead and fulfill your mitzvah of matzah on Pesach, that means the little pieces have a status that the bracha is what? Hamotzi lechem min haaretz. So we see, so this is contradictory. You want the other rabbi said, and this was fried. This is the mincha. This was fried in the small pieces. You told me before that it's all about kazayit and less than a kazayit. You told me if something is cooked, baked, and then cooked or fried, it loses the status of, if you told me that the bracha is kamotzi if it's more than a kazayit, and if it's less than a kazayit, you told me it's a mizonot. And here we see that it's not so. We see, and your source that you learned it out from is you wanted to learn it out from the law of a mincha. Where did you know that from? Where did you want to say that you know that if you're eating something that was baked and then fried, and you want to learn out this law that it depends a kazayit, not a kazayit, you want to learn out from mincha, because you found a precedent that you had the mincha that was fried, and there was a piece the size of a kazayit. You want and the brachas hamotzi. You want to learn out from the mincha that was hamotzi. But we see clearly that we have another rabbi that clearly states that the mincha, even less than a kazayit, you would say a motzi lechem and aretz. So it doesn't add up. You're making a distinction between something that's a kazayit and not a kazayit. If you baked it and then you fried it, you say the law depends if it's a kazayit or not. And we see from mincha that no, that both cases, whether it's a kazayit or less than a kazayit, the bracha would be a hamotzi. So the Gemara answers, Hachem mayaskinan kisheirsan. The brisa that says you took the little pieces of matzah and you went ahead and you joined them together and you'll make, and it added up to a kazayit, it's not talking that you ate the little pieces separately. Because if you eat the little pieces separately, and since these were fried, it would not be hamotzi. The bracha would be mezonot. But we're talking about you took these little pieces that were fried, and then you went ahead and you mixed, and then you put water on them. You kneaded them again. You started the process like when you make dough. You went ahead and you rebaked it. You took these pieces together that were fried, and now you went ahead and you rebaked it. And therefore, and you mix it together, and as a result of the rebaking, you went ahead, and that's how it formed the kazayit, because you mixed it together. You took these pieces, you mixed it together, and then you went ahead, and now you have a kazayit. So that's why you say hamotzi lechem min haaretz. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, ihachi ema seifa. The seifa says, v'hu k'she'achla mechdei achilas pras. It says that in order for a person to fulfill his mitzvah of matzah, or in order for a person to go ahead and get karetz, he has to eat this amount, b'chdei achilat pras. We spoke about that before last time. Achilat pras is a certain amount of time that it takes to eat a certain amount of bread. You have to eat this kazayit in the time that it could take a person to eat a half a loaf of bread, or a certain amount of bread, which we say is over, let's say, anywhere between 2 and 9 minutes. Some say 7 minutes is kadech. You have to eat within 7 minutes in order for you, if you wanted to say a bracha achrona, how you have, like we spoke about Friday night, over how much time do you need to eat that 1 ounce of bread? Let's say, I think some say 7 minutes. You should eat it within 7 minutes. If you don't eat it within 7 minutes, so it's 2 different eatings. It's not considered. It's like you ate this. It's not. We don't connect the eatings. We don't look at this eating. If I ate this, I ate a small bite now. Then 10 minutes, another small bite. We don't look at that. It's called one eating. An eating which is over such a long period of time, regarding fulfilling of eating a kazayit, we don't look at that as a kazayit. So therefore, it says, the Gemara says, if it's talking about that you remixed this fried little piece of matzah together and then you rebaked it, if that's the case, it should say that you ate it, not you ate them. If you put them together and reformed them and reshaped them, then now that they became the size of a kazayit, they're no longer small pieces. So you shouldn't say if you ate them, you should say you ate it, because it became one. It became singular. You put it back to one piece. But the fact that you say you shall one means that there's still many pieces left. And yet it's considered matzah, even though it's less than a what? A kazayit, and it was fried. That's the Gemara's. So Gemara says you can't tell me that they reconstituted together, they put it together again. So what does the Gemara say? So the Gemara answers, Hacham Mayaskina, we have a different approach. Bibo melechem godol. That means to say that you had a big piece, and then you cut the, let's say you fried a big piece, and then after you fried the big piece, you cut some of it into pieces, but you left a large amount of the big piece intact. So since the rest of the loaf is considered hamotzi, because let's say you had a piece the size of 3 ounces. And from the 3 ounces, you took 1 ounce of the 3 and you cut into small little pieces, but you left the piece the size of what? 2 ounces. So since that piece the size of 2 ounces retained the bracha of hamotzi, so these little pieces will still have the bracha hamotzi, since the rest of it still is called bread. If the rest is gone, if everything is cut into little pieces, so then we'll look at this whole thing as mezonot. But once, it's like the daddy and the son. The daddy is still there. The 2/3 are still there. So this little pieces that came out that were broken in still will retain the bracha of the rest. So it's a good question. What the Gemara, it's a good question. Exactly what the Gemara, the details of this point that it came from a large loaf. The Gemara says if it came from a large loaf and the large loaf was not fully cut, so therefore now your question is how much. I would think as long as in the loaf is left a piece that's the kazayid. So therefore, this is part of that loaf. That's what I would think. Let's see if any of the commentaries say how do they learn pshat. Yeah, that's how they learn pshat. That the original that you took it from is still the size of a kazayid and still called bread. So if that's called bread, you're not going to see that the little something the other piece is not bread. It came from that loaf. But once the loaf is totally the little pieces, then the whole thing is considered mezonot. So the Gemara says, and the Gemara concludes, "My Haviyallah." That's how we're going to end today. What is the law? What's the halacha regarding this thing? Amar Rav Sheshes. Rav Sheshes says, "Hi chavitza." Rav Sheshes says, "This chavitza, this thing that's made with flour." And you had pieces of matzah, and then you went ahead and you mixed it. You mixed it with flour and oil, and you you fried it. Afagav, he says, Afagav the less be pirura kazayit. He says even if it's not the size of a kazayit, yet mevarach alav hamotzi lechem min aretz. So these words of the Gemara saying that even though it's less than a kazayit, the piece of less than a kazayit, you'll still make a what? Hamotzi lechem min aretz. So Tosfos disagrees with Rashi. He understands this Gemara is when you did not, this is talking before you fried it. You had pieces of matzah, and then you took little pieces of matzah, and then what did you do with it? And you mixed it together, right? You connected these pieces with with milk or with some other type of liquid, that you connected these pieces together using this type of liquid or something to make it some sort of mush. So then he says it's still the fact that you took these pieces of matzah. They were matzah. I don't want to say the word. I got to be careful to Sfardim. Sfardim make mezonot on matzah. So let's say these pieces of bread. They took these pieces of bread. Bread is hamotzi, and then you mix. You put some water over it, or put some milk over these breads, these pieces of bread. And as a result of the milk, now they came together. These different pieces of bread came together as a result of the milk, the moisture of the milk glued these pieces together. So Rav Shesha says, if the moisture of the milk glues the pieces together, you didn't subsequently fry it. It's still normal bread. It was baked bread, but what you did was you sogged it. You made it very soggy as a result of the milk. So he says, you still make hamotzi. It does not lose its bracha motzi, even if it's less than a kazayit, as long as it has the look of bread. It still looks like bread. That's what Rava says. You look at it, it looks like bread. It looks like bread, but it has some milk. By the way, we generally don't make bread milks, because there's a different issue. If you want to make it dairy, you have to make a sign, some sort of sign. It's clear in the way you make it that it's dairy. Those people shouldn't use it for me. But this is the bread was mixed with the milk, but it's not it's baked bread. It wasn't subsequently fried. So even if it's less than a kazayit, less than the size of a kazayit, the piece is less than an ounce, but it looks like bread. And the fact that you put some milk over it to glue it together does not take away the status of bread. But if you went ahead and you fried it subsequently, and you fried it and it was less than a kazayit, the pieces, then it will be a mezonot. But if it was more than a kazayit, then it'll be hamotzi. So we'll see. Maybe next time we'll look at the Shulchan Aruch. This nifl, very big effect. The appearance could have an effect. If something doesn't look like bread, right? We're going to see more about that. Right. In this Gemara, it says if it's less than a kazayit, less than an olive, and according to Tosfot, this was not fried. It was pieces of bread, little pieces of bread, and you mix them together through what? Through this milk. And now the milk took away the total appearance of bread. It's no more hamotzi. If it took away the total, it doesn't look like bread. These were little pieces. But what does it sound like from the Gemara? Now, according to this language of the Gemara, it sounds like, we have to see the Shulchan Aruch, that there's two negatives, so to speak. Number one, it's less than a kazayit, less than an ounce. Number two, it doesn't look like, meaning, again, the only reason why he says you say hamotzi is because you have one, he says it has to have the appearance of bread, and it has to have what? Even if it's less than a kazayit, the appearance of bread is a key. He says as long as it appears like bread, less than a kazayit would be fine. If it was less than a kazayit, you'll still say hamotzi lechem min aretz. But that's because, even though it's a small piece, but that's because it looks like bread and it wasn't fried. But if you subsequently, if you subsequently fried it, then it could be a mezonot. We'll see. It sounds a little complicated, everybody, but we'll get there. We'll work on it. We'll try to understand it better. And Sunday we'll be on the Zoom at 10 o'clock, and Monday we're back live here in the shul. I want to thank everybody for joining.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You too.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Rabbi, we're allowed to shave today?
Yes, you can take a haircut today also.
Great.
Take a haircut. You could do it already in the morning. You could do it in the morning. Cover Shabbat.
Okay, thank you, Rabbi. Amazing. Have a beautiful day.
Have a great day, everybody. You too.
Shabbat
Thank
shalom.
you. Shabbat shalom, everybody. Shabbat shalom. All the best. Shabbat shalom.